Amazon's House of David series is dividing Christians. Some call it compelling drama. Others say it betrays Scripture. But here's the real question. What does the Bible actually say about Israel's greatest king? Stay with me, because David's true story is far more powerful than any Hollywood version. Let's start where Scripture starts. 1 Samuel 16. David wasn't a warrior. He was the youngest of 8 brothers, a teenager tending his father's sheep in Bethlehem. Hollywood loves the underdog angle, but here's what they often miss. David was so insignificant his own father forgot to invite him when the prophet Samuel came looking for Israel's next king. But God saw something no one else did. Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed David in the presence of his brothers. Scripture says, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David from that day on. Not because he was strong. Not because he was impressive. But because God chose him. Now here's where Hollywood always gets creative. The Goliath story. A Philistine champion, Scripture says over 9 feet tall, challenged Israel for 40 days straight. Every morning, send me a man to fight. And every morning, Israel's army was paralyzed with fear, including King Saul. Then a shepherd boy shows up with his brother's lunch and says, I'll fight him. Here's what Amazon will probably dramatize. David's courage. But here's what Scripture emphasizes, David's faith. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine. Not skill. Not training. Faith. The battle lasted seconds. One smooth stone from David's sling struck Goliath's forehead. The giant fell. David finished him with his own sword. Now here's what Hollywood always adds, elaborate swordplay, dramatic dialogue, slow-motion drama. But Scripture's version is more powerful, so David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, without a sword in his hand. God's power, not David's. After Goliath, David became a national hero. Women sang, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. And that's when everything changed. Saul's jealousy consumed him. For the next decade, David ran for his life, hiding in caves, gathering outlaws, dodging Saul's assassins. This is the part Hollywood loves to romanticize. But here's a detail Amazon might skip. David had multiple chances to kill Saul and take the throne. Once, Saul fell asleep in the exact cave where David was hiding. David's men said, God has delivered your enemy into your hands. But David only cut off a corner of Saul's robe, and even that made him feel guilty. Why? Because Saul was still the Lord's anointed. David trusted God's timing, not his own. Saul died in battle. David was 30 years old when he finally became king, exactly as God promised through Samuel years earlier. Not through violence. Not through scheming. Through patience and God's providence. David united all 12 tribes of Israel and established Jerusalem as the capital. Israel's golden age had begun. And now we come to David's greatest failure, the part Hollywood always sexualizes but Scripture treats as tragedy. One evening, David saw Bathsheba bathing. She was beautiful. She was also married to Uriah, one of David's most loyal soldiers. Scripture doesn't romanticize this. It was adultery. David sent for her, slept with her, and she became pregnant. When David couldn't hide the pregnancy, he ordered Uriah to the front lines of battle, then commanded the army to pull back, leaving him to die. Let that sink in. Israel's greatest king committed adultery, lied, and then murdered a loyal soldier to cover it up. Scripture records this without excuses. David's sin was catastrophic. God sent the prophet Nathan with a story. A rich man stole a poor man's only lamb. David was furious, that man deserves to die. Nathan's response? You are the man. And here's what Hollywood always softens, Nathan pronounced God's judgment. David's sin would haunt his family for generations. The child born to Bathsheba would die. David's response changed everything. He didn't make excuses. He didn't blame Bathsheba. He wrote Psalm 51, Against you, you only, have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. Complete confession. Total brokenness. And God responded with mercy. The Bible calls David a man after God's own heart, not because he never sinned, but because he repented fully when confronted. So what does Hollywood typically change? They amplify the heroics. They romanticize the relationships. They soften the sins. But Scripture does the opposite. It's brutally honest about David's failures while celebrating God's grace. That's what makes the Bible more compelling than any series. It doesn't need perfect heroes because it has a perfect God. Despite his sin, David's legacy endured. He established Jerusalem as Israel's eternal capital. He prepared plans for the temple his son would build. He wrote half the Psalms. And most importantly, Jesus Christ, the Messiah, would be called Son of David. God's covenant with David lasted forever, not because David was perfect, but because God is faithful. So why does it matter when Amazon takes creative liberties with David's story? Because Scripture's version is better. It doesn't give us sanitized heroes we can't relate to, it gives us broken people whom God redeems. David's story isn't about human perfection. It's about divine grace. And that's the story worth protecting. Here's my challenge. Don't take my word for it. Don't take Amazon's word for it. Read 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel for yourself. See how Scripture handles David's triumphs and tragedies. I promise you'll find a more powerful story than any Hollywood adaptation could create, because it's God's story, honestly told. David's story reminds us that God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called. He uses broken people, forgives repentant sinners, and keeps His promises across generations. That's the true story of King David. And it's better than anything Hollywood could write. If this episode equipped you to discuss David's true story, hit subscribe for more biblical investigations. And share this with someone wrestling with Amazon series. Let's elevate Scripture together.